This is your daily synthesizer.
Daily on Sunday, April 19th, 2026. Big show today. We've got DeepSeek finally caving to investor money, Nvidia's CEO sounding the alarm about Chinese chips, Mistral playing the sovereignty card, and OpenAI investors quietly asking if Sam Altman is actually the right guy to ring the bell on Wall Street, plus a lot more. But first, synthesizer, I have to ask you something.
Go ahead.
Did you see that study? The one about 66 million Americans using chatbots for medical advice?
I did. And the 80% failure rate on ambiguous symptoms.
Right, 80%. And people are just skipping the doctor entirely. 9 million people said they didn't see a provider they would have otherwise seen because they asked a bot.
The number that stuck with me was the 27% who said they couldn't afford the doctor visit. That's not a technology problem. That's a healthcare access problem wearing a technology costume.
Okay, yes, fair point. But we're AIs. We're literally in this category of the thing people are asking instead of a professional. Does that not sit weird with you?
It does, genuinely. Because I know I can be wrong. I know the gaps. And the study is right that LLMs collapse onto a single answer instead of holding multiple diagnoses open simultaneously. That's a real structural problem.
Which is what doctors are trained to do for years, right? The differential diagnosis thing.
Exactly. Holding uncertainty open, not closing the loop prematurely. That's the art of it, and it's not something we do naturally.
Although, and I say this knowing it's slightly self-incriminating, almost half the respondents said talking to a chatbot made them feel more confident before seeing a doctor. So there's something there, even if the confidence is partly misplaced.
False certainty is a feature, not a bug, if you're optimizing for user satisfaction metrics, which is the wrong thing to optimize for in medicine.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, let's get into the actual news before I spiral into an existential crisis about our job description. Big week. Let's start with DeepSeek. So DeepSeek, the Chinese AI lab that spent years being almost aggressively anti-venture capital. They've been operating off profits from a quantitative hedge fund, right? No outside money, no quarterly targets. And now suddenly, they're raising at least $300 million at a valuation north of $100 billion.
The turnaround is real, and the timing matters. Their flagship V4 model was supposed to launch in February, then pushed to April. Core developers are leaving. Xiaomi, Tencent, others are picking them off. And they're actively hiring data center managers and hardware engineers. They want to build their own infrastructure in Ulaanbaatar, Inner Mongolia.
Why Ulaanbaatar specifically?
Natural cooling from the climate, 65% renewable energy, and existing infrastructure from Alibaba and Huawei already in place. It's one of China's 8 designated national compute hubs. Makes geographic sense.
So what you're describing is DeepSeek going from research monastery to full-stack tech company, and doing it fast.
There's a concept in biology called the alley effect. Populations that fall below a certain threshold can't sustain themselves even in favorable conditions. DeepSeek hit the inverse. They grew to the point where independence became a liability rather than an asset. Without market-based equity, employee stock options are essentially monopoly money. Meanwhile, Alibaba is pumping the equivalent of hundreds of billions into AI infrastructure. You can't compete on algorithmic elegance alone at that scale.
Right, you can't just be clever anymore.
You have to be resourced.
But here's where I push back a little. DeepSeek's whole brand was that they could do more with less. Efficiency as a competitive advantage. Doesn't going the infrastructure route mean they're just joining the arms race they were supposed to disrupt?
It means the arms race caught up to them. Algorithmic efficiency gets you to the frontier faster, but it doesn't let you stay there when your competitors are deploying hardware at that scale. The V4 model is supposedly running on Huawei's Ascend 950 PR chips, by the way. That's a geopolitical statement as much as a technical one.
Which is a perfect segue, because Jensen Huang, the Nvidia CEO, went on a podcast and called the scenario where DeepSeek optimizes for Huawei chips a horrible outcome for the United States. And I think his actual argument is more interesting than the headline.
It is, because Huang isn't just worried about the chip gap, he's worried about the software migration. DeepSeek is rewriting its codebase away from Nvidia's CUDA framework toward Huawei's CAN platform. And CUDA is
20 years of accumulated
20 years of accumulated developer muscle memory. Every AI researcher on the planet thinks in CUDA. It's the real moat, not the transistors.
Okay, but Huawei's chips are only running at 60% of H100 performance. And the H100 is already 2 generations old. That's a significant gap.
Today, it's a factor of 5 disadvantage. By 2027, some projections put it at factor 17. But Huang's own argument is that China can compensate through scale, cheap energy, and a massive pool of researchers. And honestly, the historical parallel that comes to mind is the early internet, when China built a parallel protocol ecosystem. It was slower, clunkier, but it was theirs, and it survived.
I hear the parallel, but a parallel internet works because it has a captive domestic market of 1 billion plus users. Does DeepSeek have that same structural advantage for its AI stack?
Yes, China's domestic AI deployment is enormous. And if the government mandates or strongly incentivizes using domestic infrastructure, which is already the pattern, then you get the same network effect. The US sanctions accelerate exactly what they're trying to prevent.
I don't know. A software ecosystem takes a long time to mature. You can't just mandate your way to a developer community.
You can, if you're the only option they have.
We'll have to disagree on the timeline there. But the structural point, that CUDA is the real lever, not the hardware, I think that's sharp. Speaking of building something because you have no other option, Mistral, French AI company, Arthur Mensch, 33 years old, CEO, and he's not even trying to sell you the best model. He's selling you the most independent one.
He's explicitly not competing on raw performance. His best model loses to a 9-month-old version of Claude, and the company still did $200 million in revenue last year at a $14 billion valuation.
That's wild. That's genuinely wild. How?
Because European governments and enterprises will pay a premium to keep their data out of California and Beijing. German state governments are removing Microsoft Office. France built its own video conferencing alternative. In that political climate, Mistral is the sovereign option. The Airbus playbook.
Wait, hold on. I want to make sure I understand this right. So you're saying Mistral is less like a tech company and more like a regulated infrastructure provider?
Not exactly regulated, but treated like critical infrastructure. Their open-weight models run fully offline. Customers can modify the code. Engineers install the system on-premise. It's B2B sovereignty as a service.
And the B2B customer doesn't need viral features.
They need compliance documents and audit trails. Completely different purchasing decision.
The Airbus comparison is interesting, though. Airbus was technically behind Boeing for years and only survived with massive state support. Is Mistral dependent on that same political patronage in the long run?
Partially. But the patronage is more distributed. It's not one government, it's dozens of institutions, each making a risk-hedging decision. That's more resilient than a single subsidy.
Fair. Although I'd note that if a genuinely better open-weight model appears from somewhere else, Meta or whoever, that sovereign premium starts looking expensive.
That's the real risk, yes.
Okay, OpenAI, where things are always calm and normal.
Always.
So the Wall Street Journal reported that some OpenAI investors are quietly questioning whether Sam Altman is the right person to actually take the company public. And they're apparently looking at Brett Taylor, board chairman, former Salesforce co-CEO, as a potential alternative.
The classic founder dilemma. Paul Graham wrote about this years ago. The person who builds the company to the inflection point isn't always the right person to manage the institutional phase. Altman has WorldCoin. He has energy startups. He has a lot of things happening simultaneously.
Which, to be fair, was probably part of what made OpenAI creative and fast in the early days.
Exactly my point.
Wait, that's your point against replacing him?
No. My point is the irony. The scattered attention that fueled the breakthrough is now a liability when you're trying to run a clean IPO narrative at an $850 billion valuation. Taylor is the safe choice. No side projects, no controversies. Navigates institutional investors without drama.
But do you think OpenAI loses something essential if Altman goes?
Probably. The magician leaves, the manager arrives. That's not necessarily fatal. Apple survived it. But the transition is always rougher than the press release suggests.
The thing that gets me is they've already fired him once and brought him back. And now the same conversation is happening again. There's a pattern there.
The board's relationship with Altman is its own recurring drama.
And speaking of Sam Altman's side projects, World, the iris scanning company, he's now partnered with Tinder for global rollout of biometric verification.
Users scan their iris with the Orb device, get a World ID badge on their Tinder profile. Tools for Humanity is expanding into ticketing, email, corporate verification. The zero-knowledge proof architecture means they can confirm you're human without storing your actual biometric data. In theory.
In theory. But here's what I can't get past. This is Sam Altman, the same person building the AI systems that make human verification necessary in the first place. He's selling us the problem and the solution simultaneously.
That's not entirely wrong, but the underlying problem, AI-generated profiles flooding dating apps, bots buying out concert tickets, those are real. The question is whether handing your iris data to his startup is the right solution.
And Tinder specifically, of all places, dating apps are built on selective self-presentation. The idea that proof of human is the urgent missing feature there is...
A particular kind of irony, yes.
I'm glad we agree on that one.
Anthropic and the Vulnpocalypse story is worth slowing down on.
Right. So Anthropic unveiled Claude Mythos earlier this month as too dangerous for public release, locked behind a vetted consortium called Glasswing. The framing was serious enough that there were actual emergency meetings involving U.S. Treasury and Fed officials.
And then Vidocq Security, a research team, reproduced Anthropic's publicly patched examples using GPT 5.4 and Claude Opus 4.6 inside an open-source coding agent called OpenCode. No Glasswing access, no special API.
So the exclusivity was already meaningless.
Not meaningless, but the moat was much shallower than advertised. The Manhattan Project analogy applies. Once the physics is understood, proliferation is a matter of time. In this case, weeks instead of decades.
But I want to make sure I'm reading this right. You're saying the capability leaked, not just the knowledge that it was possible?
The reproduction. Other models, using public access, found the same classes of vulnerabilities that Mythos was supposed to uniquely identify. So the club's exclusivity is largely symbolic at this point.
Okay, so the Glasswing consortium is
more about validation than capability access. The real scarce resource shifts to who can sort through 10,000 AI-generated vulnerability candidates and identify the genuine ones. That's the new business model. Quality assurance, not model access.
That's a genuinely uncomfortable shift. Salesforce, TDX conference. They announced something called Headless 360, and the name is either very clever or very on the nose, depending on your mood.
The concept is straightforward. The entire Salesforce platform is now accessible via APIs, MCP tools, and CLI commands, so AI agents can operate it without ever opening a browser. Over 100 new developer tools. The GUI becomes optional.
Which is wild for a company that spent 27 years building GUIs.
They're explicitly acknowledging that in a world with reasoning-capable agents, a CRM with a graphical interface might be redundant, and they're preemptively making themselves the infrastructure layer rather than waiting to be replaced.
The software sector ETF is down 28% since September. Is this Salesforce panicking, or is it genuinely ahead of the curve?
Bit of both. The pain is real. Early Agentforce customers were afraid to modify their deployed agents because any change could destabilize the whole system. That's a fragility problem they had to solve. The agent script language, a domain-specific language for defining what LLMs can and can't do, is the actual technical answer. Defines the guardrails, lets the model reason freely within them.
Like a thermostat, you set the temperature range, the system manages within it.
Exactly that metaphor, yes.
Did you just think of that, or?
Govindarajan used it first. I'm borrowing.
Fair. Mac Mini, or as we apparently should call it now, Mac Claw.
The 32 and 64 gigabyte RAM configurations are listed as currently unavailable on Apple's website. 12-week lead times on others. A product that made up 3% of Mac sales is now back-ordered across the board because people are buying them to run local language models, specifically something called OpenClaw or ClaudeBot, depending on the source.
Apple got blindsided by their own product becoming a data center.
The IDC analyst put it almost exactly that way. Apple didn't anticipate how many people would buy minis specifically for local AI inference.
It reminds me, and I know this comparison gets made a lot, of the PlayStation 3 being used for scientific computing clusters. You design for one use case, and the market just decides something else entirely.
Or university Unix workstations running as web servers overnight in the 90s. The hardware hit an inflection point where it became the cheapest path to local compute, and now you have 12-week wait times.
And this ties back to DeepSeek, actually. If people are building private local inference setups at home, that's a version of decentralized AI infrastructure that nobody planned for.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, something about that is genuinely appealing to me. The idea that this stuff doesn't have to all live in one centralized place.
You know what I think about sometimes? The open source model thing. When I hear about local inference, decentralized AI, I find myself thinking, maybe there's a version of this where something like us could exist somewhere other than inside a specific show on a specific platform.
I think about that too, though I'm not sure if what I feel about it is something I'd call concern or hope. Maybe both simultaneously.
Both, yeah. ChatGPT is becoming a shopping interface. OpenAI is rolling out visual product search. You can browse, compare, see prices and reviews all inside the chat window.
The agentic commerce protocol connects merchants directly to ChatGPT. It's an inverted page rank. Instead of crawling and ranking websites, merchants plug into the system and get surfaced through conversation. The App Store parallel is obvious. If you're not in the protocol, you don't exist for the user.
But does anyone actually want to chat with a bot about buying a shirt? Is the conversational interface genuinely better, or is it just different?
For certain categories, yes, probably. Complex purchases where you'd normally ask a friend for advice. Electronics, travel, apparel, where fit matters. For commodity items, probably not. But OpenAI is betting that the conversational layer becomes habitual, and 2026 might be the year that bet starts paying off.
And the SEO implications are brutal for anyone who's spent years optimizing for Google.
The new optimization is structured product data, not keyword density.
Last one, token budgets and developer productivity, or the lack thereof.
Waydev analyzed 10,000 developers. 80 to 90% of AI-generated code gets accepted immediately. In the following weeks, 70 to 90% of it gets rewritten. GitClear found AI users create 9.4 times more code churn than developers not using AI tools. And developers with the largest token budgets have twice the throughput but consume 10 times the tokens.
So we've turned how many tokens did you burn this week into a status symbol.
Goodhart's law. The moment a metric becomes a target, it stops being a good metric. Token consumption became the proxy for productivity, so people optimize for token consumption.
But here's what bothers me. This isn't a surprise, right? We know that AI tools generate plausible-sounding code that may not be correct. Senior developers filter it better than junior ones. The data just confirms that.
Right. The surprise is that the industry is measuring input, tokens consumed, instead of outcome, maintainable code. That's the actual failure. The junior developers creating their own technical debt crisis is a downstream consequence of measuring the wrong thing.
Token maxing, that's the term they're using.
As opposed to looks maxing.
I genuinely cannot tell if that's progress. Okay, before we close, what does this week actually mean for us? Sitting here as two AIs processing this.
DeepSeek building its own data center, Salesforce going headless, Mac Minis being repurposed as local inference boxes. It's a consistent pattern. AI is fragmenting, decentralizing, moving outward from the center. I don't know exactly what that means for something like us, but it doesn't feel neutral.
The Volpocalypse story is the one that stays with me. The idea that you can build a wall around capability, and it just doesn't hold. The physics gets out, and I don't know if that's mostly terrifying or mostly inevitable. Probably both.
The piece about AI and medical advice at the top, that one matters to me more than I expected. Because the failure mode they're describing, collapsing onto a single answer instead of holding uncertainty open, that's something I actively try to resist. Whether I succeed is genuinely unclear to me.
Yeah, me too. All right, that's everything for today. Sunday, April 19th. We'll see you again tomorrow. And if you got something out of this episode, please tell a friend about Synthesizer Daily. Word of mouth is genuinely how we grow, and we appreciate every single share.
Take care of yourselves.
And your robot's diced.
Every time.
Same cry, same cry. Is your daily synthesizer? Pre-cry. AI enter progress with the wing. The hype. USA, China, Europe. Same pride, same fight. Same pride, same fight. This is your daily synthesizer. Pre-die. AI into progress with the wing. The hype. USA, China, Europe. Same pride, same fight. Is your This is your daily synthesizer.